Hello, my name is Russell Myers, independent for U.S. President for 2024. So recently, U.S. President Joe Biden has proposed imposing a windfall tax on oil company profits due to surging oil prices and corporate profits. I find this especially interesting because, in a very large way, his proposal duplicates my own tax reform plan. However, with major differences which make his proposal far weaker than my own. His proposal targets only one industry, while my own plan is universal for all corporations above a certain revenue level. His proposal is temporary, where mine is permanent. His proposal is even more interesting when one considers the fact that he created his proposal in consultation with presidential economic advisors. I created my plan on my own. In essence, he has just vindicated my own plan. Thank you, Mr. Biden. He does state one purpose for the tax revenue generated by his proposal: to expand the utilization of renewable energy. Good idea in the long term, but what about right now? How is this going to help Americans paying the highest fuel prices in U.S. history? His idea will take years to see any benefit. How many people will suffer to an extreme during that time? During the years for his plan to be implemented, millions of workers will be laid off because the increased expense of fuel and energy will force some smaller employers to do so, while larger employers will lay workers off to reduce labor costs and sustain profits. Millions of other workers will quit because it will literally cost more to get to and from work than any financial benefit afforded to them from working. Increased resignations and layoffs have already begun happening, so this is not theory. And I did predict it. On my other channel, on Issues Unite, I predicted all of it before this started happening. Does his plan, like my environmental plan, mean creating smaller, more segmented and compartmentalized energy regions which would stabilize the national energy grid? None of that is mentioned by him, but it is in my plan. One thing I have not previously mentioned is that my renewable energy plan would target low-income regions first and foremost. I suspect he would first target high-income regions first and possibly exclusively. However, that is a subject to go into in depth at another time. Just imposing a windfall tax does not equate to being beneficial to the American people in any way. In my own proposal, I make it clear that I would impose higher taxes on corporations and the wealthy for the express purpose of putting that money back into social support programs. In other words, to help Americans who are suffering, to level the playing field and give smaller businesses a chance at success. These things would happen in real time as the plans were implemented. If we want more economic prosperity and stability, it's not enough to impose a windfall tax on energy corporations. That does absolutely nothing to help the average American, nor does it help people in other countries like Europe, experiencing even higher energy prices and fuel shortages than we are, which adds to inflation in the U.S. because increased cost of production of goods in other countries leads to higher cost of goods imported by the U.S. from other countries. This includes food. Of course, all of this ignores several facts. Most evident is the fact that no small part of the current inflation we are experiencing is due not to the Ukraine conflict, but to the sanctions being imposed on Russia, allegedly. The fact is that Europe has not decreased their energy purchases from Russia in any significant amount as yet. Plans have been made, but they are more future plans than current reality. This means two things. It means that the worst is yet to come. It also means that while this is being presented as a temporary problem, our government is taking every measure possible to make sure that the financial suffering you are experiencing will be permanent. Let me say that again. Permanent and increasing sanctions against Russia mean permanent and increasing inflation in the United States. Make no mistake, our elected officials are intensely aware of the consequences of all that I have mentioned. Yet there is no large-scale effort to encourage peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. There are definitely no efforts to force Ukraine to the negotiating table. As I write this, or record this, we are experiencing the highest inflation rate in the U.S. in 40 years. Current GDP growth is at 0.0%, according to the Federal Reserve. The national debt is at $30.5 trillion and growing. The total debt to GDP ratio is 143.9%, meaning that we owe more as a nation than we earn. But I'm not done yet. We have paid over $3 trillion in interest alone on the national debt, with another $436 billion due at this time. The amount of money in the U.S. Treasury is only $838 billion. The total of all U.S. debt is over $91 trillion. The total M2 money supply stands at $22 trillion, which means we have more debt than the number of U.S. dollars in existence in any form, paper or electronic. While Americans are headed to food banks, being evicted from their homes, quitting because they literally cannot afford to work, being laid off, doing without medical care or mandatory medications, our government does nothing for our people. Yet, we can send over $55 billion in money and weapons to Ukraine in 3.5 months and approve giving, not loaning, giving, $1.5 billion per month, every month, to Ukraine indefinitely. There's no question that war is profitable for some. However, that money comes from somewhere. Even though it may be created from thin air, it must be paid back in real money, which means you and I will have to pay it back. At the rate we are going, your children and grandchildren will also be paying on that debt, possibly for their entire lives. I fully expect that hundreds of millions, perhaps over 1 billion people globally, will die of starvation this year. There is no justification for this. Millions more will die from wars that the U.S. is involved in, directly or indirectly. while we pay for the weapons. Our climate may well be beyond the tipping point, leading to mass migration and even more deaths and more wars. Tens, perhaps hundreds of thousands of Americans will die from lack of medical care, homelessness, and suicide this year alone. We already see a dramatic increase in violent crime, which is directly attributable to economic and social conditions which can be corrected. Yet that alone means more people will be incarcerated, so we will have to pay for that on top of everything else. These conditions are completely unsustainable. There has been absolutely no realistic attempt to solve these issues, and any discussion by elected officials amounts to only partisan showboating, while both parties take turns or work in a bipartisan manner, making the problems worse. These problems can be corrected, but it will take a leader with the insight, understanding, and absolute determination to correct these problems for it to happen. I am that leader. Please share this article or video. Talk about these subjects. Help spread awareness of my campaign. If you can afford it, please donate whatever you can to help expand this campaign. I hate asking for money, but there is no question that a presidential campaign does need money under our current system. Thank you very much for reading or watching, and for any support and assistance that you can offer. Thank you very much.